Hello everyone, thank you for stopping by and just taking a listen. This is a story that was told to me by a friend a few years ago, and him and two others decided to take a little hunting trip to the Uwharrie National Forest, located in North Carolina, around the Piedmont region of North Carolina. And just little details about the National Forest, and something I'll try and do on this channel is just tell like a little story of the, say, geography or history of a region. Uwharrie National Forest is actually one of the smallest national forests in the U.S. It only encompasses somewhere around 50,000 acres, which, when you compare that just even in the state of North Carolina to Pisgah National Forest, which is located in West North Carolina, Pisgah National Forest encompasses about 1.25 million acres. So that's a huge difference. It just goes to show you just how small even this tract of property is. But now that intro's out of the way, let's pretty much tell you about this story. And I'll be telling it from my friend's point of view, just more or less how it was told to me. And, you can take everything in this story with a grain of salt. I believe that there's some truth to it, but there also could be some tall tales to it. Who's to really know other than the people that were there? But at the very least, it is a somewhat exciting story, and it's certainly one that makes your head scratch a bit. And I hope you all enjoy. Thank you very much. So, to start the story off, we were a couple of broke college kids. I've always had a passion for hunting, really anything outdoors. Me, Mark, and Keith are really good friends. We've known each other since we were knee-high to a grasshopper, which, for anybody that's not from the South or hasn't heard any weird phrases like that, that pretty much just means since we were little kids. Southern phrases sometimes make no sense, sometimes all they do is make you laugh. But we all decided we were all getting out of college for our Christmas breaks around this time, and we all wanted to just do a big hunting trip with each other. Our families had done it before. We have always rabbit hunted and squirrel hunted ever since we were little kids. We'd love to go out and do it with our dads. Then once we got big enough, we'd do it with, just the three of us. And it was always a tradition that we loved. So as we were kind of deciding where to go and what we were going to do, we chose to go to Uwharrie National Forest mainly because Uwharrie allows you to camp just wherever you want. It is a primitive campsite location, and pretty much we drove the truck around wherever we wanted to and found a spot that we thought would be great. And mention again, as we were all broke college students, we really didn't want to spend the money on a hotel or Airbnb or nothing like that at the time, and we all thought we were pretty tough. It was getting late in December, and we all thought we could stick it out for, camping in about 32 degrees weather. Luckily, we didn't have to spend too much money, at least for where we were staying. We all had been camping and hiking, that kind of stuff, since we were kids, so we all had, thermal sleeping bags and big coolers and a tent and all the things you would need to more or less keep yourself alive during the winter time. And plus, Keith, his parents burned wood for their furnace, and more or less we actually helped cut a bunch of wood for that winter so we could take a ton down for the trip so we could keep a fire burning almost all the time. We ended up leaving out for the trip the day after Christmas. It was a good time for all of us to get out there, and it gave us time to spend with our family for the holidays and give us plenty of time to go out and actually enjoy what we were doing in the woods. In this particular part of the country, or in this part of the state, rifle season lasts until January 1st. So we were able to take full advantage of that. Plus, it was an area where either sex could be taken throughout the entirety of the season. So that was another big plus to us, and why we also chose to go to Uwharrie, not just because of our financial situation, but because we could take either male or female deer if we saw them, and that was a big plus to us. It'd make the trip way more worth it, since none of us had been able to go out at all during this season. Another big plus to going right after Christmas is every single one of us had a little bit extra pocket money when we were going down, so that meant We all got a few more snacks. We got a little bit better food than we normally have got, not just hot dogs roasting over a fire. We got some burgers and stuff like that to make. And because it being right after Christmas, we were able to buy a few extra things that we normally wouldn't have got, like hand warmers and actually a couple of battery packs for our phones and just kind of little things that we wouldn't normally bring on a trip. But since it was right after Christmas, we kind of figured why not. You know, being young, done with your money, we saw stuff in the store and went, hey, I want that. So when you enter the national forest, there's a little dirt road that takes you down through there. It goes a long ways back into the forest, and you're only allowed to camp in certain like designated spots, which was fine with us. And we drove until we found one that we pretty much thought that no one would be this far back, and you know nobody's gonna mess with our stuff since we ain't gonna be at the campsite, but only at the nighttime. We'll be gone all day, and if we get something, even partially down into the night. We drove until we found a large campsite that we could actually pull a boat and get around into the site with us. Because I forgot to mention, we had brought a John boat with us to get around because Uwharrie National Forest actually borders the Yadkin River and parts of Bladden Lake. So we brought a John boat with us to get to areas that a lot of people probably can't just on foot. The campsite was probably about 200 yards from the road. It was behind the big tree line. So the big thing that we liked about it is the fact that if you were on the road after everything was set up, you could not see our campsite. You couldn't even see the truck sitting there. So we really liked that. Like, again, we weren't going to be at the campsite really much at all during the day. And even though we figured, you know, nobody was going to come through and, you know, take anything, we figured we were just being paranoid. But we also liked the fact that there was a little bit of safety in the fact that from the road, you can't see anything we've got back in the woods. So for the first day, we got there at about 11 in the morning, maybe 11:30. And we were all fine with that because we knew it was going to take a while to get down there from where we lived. And we knew we were going to get just an evening hunt on the first day after we set everything up. So we ate our lunch of peanut butter crackers and a ham sandwich. And we hooked everything back up to the truck and took off to the boat ramp that's actually on the Uwharrie National Forest property. And it was a great thing that we decided to take the John boat with us, because there was so many areas that we wanted to look at just to even see, because we all use the app called Onyx that allows you to look at game lands, whether it be private game lands, public game lands, or anything like that. It uses satellite imaging to more or less show what all the area looks like, and it even gives you like real-time data in terms of, you know, what the seasons are, what the limits are, what kind of rules and regulations the actual tract of property you're on has. So we enjoyed that so much. That was one of the first seasons we actually started using Onyx, and it was a great feature to have, especially out on this lake when we're looking all around us as game lands, and we can see, you know, what parcel of game lands this area is part of, and you know where this borders into private property or anything like that. So that was it was a big help for when we started hunting way far from where we were used to. So that evening, we all found spots that we kind of wanted to look at, and we didn't really want to go too far from each other, just because we didn't really want to spend that much on gas for the first day, and we only brought 2 5-gallon jugs for this little boat. So we all went to areas that wasn't too far from each other in terms, I think they were maybe about a mile apart for each. So we didn't see nothing for the rest of that evening. We all decided after sun went down, we luckily had some phone signal where we were at, so we all gave each other a call. We all met back up. Keith actually came through and was driving the boat because he had to go to the furthest spot. And pretty much for that evening, we didn't see nothing. No deer, nothing like that. So we all came back to the campsite and had ourselves some burgers for supper, and we headed off to sleep. Our first night in the forest really wasn't eventful at all. It was the only night that was going to be above freezing. That's the only eventful part of that night. And we all knew that we were going to take advantage of how warm it was going to be that night in terms of getting all our firewood and stuff split and cut, because the next 2 nights we were there was going to be brutal. Next morning, we got up before the sun even rose, and as we were walking through, we all had to have our flashlights just to even tell we were stepping. Mark actually noticed that it looked like something been walking through a campsite, but by what we could tell, it just looked like a coon. It wasn't nothing crazy. We could just tell a raccoon would be walking through, maybe a possum. It was obviously trying to get to some of the leftovers and stuff we had put in our coolers, but luckily we had these big Yeti coolers, and they couldn't get into it for the life of them. So, but day number 2 was way more eventful. We had actually set up a couple of trail cams the day before, so we hunted in the morning, and I actually saw 2 does that morning. They were walking through a field together, and sadly I didn't take a shot on them. They were at a point where I wasn't confident to even take a shot with a rifle at them, and that's one thing that we always tried to practice. You know, we want to be ethical and safe about what we're doing. And when you're walking out in the woods with a high-powered rifle, you know, it's nothing to joke about. A lot of people like to joke about when they go hunting, they drink and, you know, party and that kind of stuff. But you do have to realize you've got to be careful when you're taking these things out. And one of the things you're always taught, especially like we were as kids, is not only do you have to think about what you're looking at, you also got to think about what's behind it. And do you feel confident about making this shot? Do you feel like you're going to be able to do a humane job? Because if you're not, there's no reason to do it. But even though I couldn't get a shot off on either of the does, at least we knew that there was some movement, especially the time that they walked through was about 9 in the morning, so it was kind of late for them to be moving even at that time. So we all met back up for lunch and went back to where we'd parked the boat and sat there and ate our sandwiches and stuff for lunch and talked about, you know, hey, we're all going to kind of set up around this area because we know that there's a little bit of movement through there. Plus, Mark had brought a couple of trail cams that were more or less just throwaways. You know, if we lost them, it wasn't no big deal because they'd had them for probably 20 years. So we had actually set up one in that area. So right after lunch, while it was probably about 11:30, maybe 12 in the evening, we walked out just to go get that trail cam before we all went back in at about 1:30 for, you know, our evening to kind of almost not hunt. Once it gets real dusky dark is a good time for when they start moving. But sadly, after that evening hunt, nothing else came through. I didn't see either of the 2 does again, and neither Mark or Keith had saw them either. So we all went back to the boat and, you know, rode back to the landing and got back to the campsite. Later on that night, after we'd eaten, we were just sitting there watching the fire, and for the first time this trip, we actually saw another car. We see headlights coming in the distance down the road, and we could hear a truck coming through, and it's coming through pretty fast. All of us got kind of on edge because it was about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and this is the first person that we've seen coming all day, even yesterday. And when we came back up from hunting, we knew that, you know, none of the other camping spots that was on down the road had anybody in them. And before the truck got within our sight, before we could even see the headlights, we heard dogs barking somewhere to the right of us. They were running almost parallel to our campsite. They stopped away from our camp and began barking like crazy in one spot. We all kind of sat there and calmed down, settled down, took a big breath. And as we listened to the dog's bark, we could hear the owner, you know, come walking up a little ways, because we couldn't see the headlights, but we could actually hear him stepping through the woods. And we all just took a little sigh of relief, because after we'd heard the dogs barking and stuff like that coming through the woods, we all kind of realized, hey, this guy's coming through, he's following his dogs. They're on the trail, it's hot, and that's all he's doing out here right now. And we can fully understand that, and heck, there's a chance that one of us knew him, because we all have run coon dogs before in the past, even though we truly like to run rabbits more than coons. We sat there listening to the dogs barking, the guy walking up through the woods, because they were far enough away that we could still hear them, but there's no way we could see them. And we listened to him just walking up to the dogs, and we could tell he was getting somewhat closer to them. When all of a sudden we heard a loud thud about where the dogs were. It sounded like something just fell out the tree. We all figured with the As loud as that thud was, we all figured the dogs had treated a bear on accident, and when they started to calm down, they could hear their owner coming through the woods. The bear took it as a moment to jump at the tree and try and take off. We could hear it running for a good while until it just went back to silence. It finally got far enough away that we couldn't hear it no more. We did find it a little odd, though, that none of the dogs tried to take off after it. And they just stood there in the same spot. They were still just barking. Not a single one decided to run for it, or at least by what we could tell. We all kind of looked at each other and joked like, hey, I wish our dogs were that smart. I wish they'd stop chasing whatever we don't want them to be chasing at that moment. After the man had reached where the dogs were at, they were still barking, and we didn't really find that odd. We figured they were just still barking to kind of show where they were at. That's what a lot of coon hounds will do, or any kind of hound dog. They'll bark just kind of tell you like where they're at and what's going on. And the man got up to his dogs where they were still at, and they hadn't moved. And we heard him laugh, and he said, "You boys treated another damn possum." As he was walking the dogs back, he veered a little off course, and he got to the point where he could actually see our campfire. We could barely make out his outline, and we could definitely see the outlines of the dogs and stuff. We all kind of laughed as he looked down at his dogs and said, "You boys almost ran up on them." We all laughed, and Mark yelled back to him and said, "It's all good. We enjoyed watching them." The man walked his dogs back down to the truck and got them into their boxes, and he drove off. We all sat there and kind of laughed about it and just kind of talked about the last time we had been out rabbit hunting and running our beagles. And then Mark brought it up because we all just we didn't think about it too much. But he said, "What in the hell was that thud when they got up there?" And we all kind of looked at each other and went, we're not sure, because we thought it was a bear. They had treated a bear and it tried to take off again. But the guy even got up there and laughed and was saying that they had treated a possum. So we all were confused, and we were sitting there wondering, what was that pop? And finally I just looked at him and said, "Hey, it was probably just a limb breaking. He got up there, the possum was up there in the tree, and a limb snapped and fell and hit the ground. It's about what it sounded like it could have been. Not a big deal." It wasn't long after that we started to settle in for the night. But later that night, I woke up and heard just a loud pop. It's somewhere outside the tent. I couldn't tell how far. I just knew I heard a pop. I looked over, and it had also woke up Mark. Keith, he's still passed out. You couldn't wake that man up for nothing. We both looked at each other, and Mark even said that it's probably just an acorn or a hickory nut falling. The woods were dead silent, and when you're out there in the woods and it's dead quiet, the smallest sound can just sound like a thunderstorm. I mean, there's a reason why every hunter jokes that when they hear a squirrel, they think it's a deer when they're out in the woods. We both sat there just kind of listening. Neither of us were worried about anything. We both figured, it was just an acorn or a hickory nut hitting the ground, or even just a small limb. But after about a minute or so, a little rock or acorn or something hit the side of our tent, and that made both of us jump just a bit. We don't like to admit it, but if it's late at night, you're in the middle of the woods, it's pitch black, and it's quiet, you tend to get a little chicken when something just kind of sneaks up on you. Little jump, After whatever it was hit the side of the tent, me and Mark decided we were going to grab our flashlights and just kind of look outside and see what's falling on us, see if we're going to have to move the tent just in case. Both of us shined our lights all around the branches and stuff that were right over us. We were looking for anything that could have been dropping on us, whether it be hickory nuts or acorns or even a small limb or something. But neither one of us could see anything. Kind of cold, so we decided to get back near the fire and get it going again. After that, both of us were sitting there watching the fire, and I looked over at Mark, and I just kind of joked how crazy it was that them dogs spooked a bear, so close to our campsite. And then it both kind of dawned on us, because we had heard it run off, but we didn't really think about it, especially after laughing at the guy talking about how they treat a possum. And we both looked at each other like, what was it that ran off then? Was a deer or something just right behind the tree or right real close, and it spooked them off? We weren't really sure. Even if it was a black bear, that didn't worry us too much, because they're usually pretty scared of humans, and it ain't that hard to scare them off. All you gotta do is kind of look big or make a lot of noise or racket, and they'll take off. They aren't too much of a threat around here. By this point, it was probably about 1 in the morning. We just kind of sat by the fire, keeping it going and trying to warm up a bit since we had been out in the cold. And nothing else had fell around our tent, so we just kind of chalked it up to, maybe a late acorn falling. Not a big deal. And we didn't think much of it for the rest of the night, so we got back in our bags and laid down. The next morning, we all got up a little late, did us not going to sleep till about 1 in the morning. That evening, when hunting the same field that I was yesterday, I saw a 4-point buck come through the tree line. I shot it, probably around the lungs, and I could see the hide ripple through my scope. So I knew I'd hit it, and I'd sent out a text to Mark and Keith telling them, hey, I've got one. I'm going to start tracking here in just a little bit. Keith was the closest one to me, and he texted back and said that he would go put his climbing stand back in the boat and meet me about where I'd set up my stand, because I didn't want to move too far from it, so that way we'd have a good estimate on about where to have to track it, because it did run off back into the tree line. Mark was a little further away from us, so he said he was going to stay in his spot and see if anything else came out. Keith and I met up right at the bottom where I'd set up my stand, and we began tracking the deer for where it'd run off. Luckily, it didn't go too far. It went about 400 yards back into the woods, and it's pretty easy to track. I tagged and gutted the buck, and while Keith watched and tried not to puke because I accidentally poked the stomach out with my knife. And if you've never smelt that before on a deer, pray you never do, because it is a nasty smell. We drug the deer back to the boat and began to quarter it out so we could fit it into the cooler. Mark texted and said he'd be heading our way in just a little bit, since it'd be way past dark when he finally gets to the boat. After packing the deer into our big cooler the best we could, we saw Mark walking down the riverbank a little ways from us. So we started the boat and went and picked him up. When we got back to the camp, we noticed our stack of wood was knocked over. None of us thought anything of this. We just figured, one of us done it in the morning, or we didn't stack it real good and the wind knocked it over. Wasn't that big of a deal to us. Nothing else around the camp was messed up, so we didn't think nothing of it, and Keith got to work getting the fire going. Mark and I began getting the tenderloins from the buck out of the cooler. All of us were stoked that night because we had actually got a deer on this trip. It made us all insanely happy. None of us really expected to get a deer this trip. We more or less just went out because it was a tradition, and we want to spend time with all of us because we've been friends since we were kids, and we had all went in different paths for our life, and we just like, always getting together and keeping a tradition alive. It's also a big benefit that this was only the second day of us hunting, and we still had a full another day to go, so it really put our spirits in high gear. Since tomorrow was the last day for all of us being here, and we really wanted to get the most out of it since we had already gotten one, we decided to try and pack it in early that night. We laid a couple big logs on the fire and all got settled in the tent, and it was probably around 9 o'clock when we laid down. Sometime late into the night, we were all jolted awake by the sound of a tree limb breaking somewhere out in the woods. Keith has literally slept through a tornado before in his lifetime, and this woke him up, so it was a loud sound. The fire wasn't completely out, so we had a little bit of light just around the camp. Keith and Mark grabbed their flashlights and started looking around the trees to see where the branch broke. I stoked the fire and added a few more logs to get it going. After the fire was brought back, I grabbed my light and we started to look around the fire, looking all around the trees. This night was extremely cold, so none of us really wanted to walk too far from the fire. About 10 minutes passed and we were all about ready to get back in our bags because it was cold. We were freezing. When all of a sudden we could hear something walking towards us in the dark. The footsteps were heavy, and it immediately caught us off guard because if you've ever heard a deer or you've ever heard a bear walk through the woods, probably the biggest animals that we have in North Carolina, they don't sound heavy. If you're not paying attention, you could almost not hear a bear walking past you. They've got thick pads on the bottom of their feet that help them dampen the sound. And a deer doesn't make that much noise when going through the thick leaves of the underbrush. It literally just sounds like something kind of scooting along the limbs and the dead leaves. And whatever this was sounded like it was on two legs, and it sounded heavy. It sounded like a big person walking towards us. As it kept on walking towards us, Mark literally looked at us and said, "That's not a bear, is it?" And Keith said, "There's no way." He said, "If it was a bear, we'd barely be able to hear that damn thing right now. It'd be sneaking up on us." I said, "Boys, I'm pretty sure this is a person walking up on us, but why is somebody out here at probably 12 in the morning, and we hadn't heard any cars come up the drive, we hadn't heard anything else, we hadn't heard nobody talking, nothing like that." So we were all kind of on edge after listening to these footsteps coming toward us. We all shined our lights in the direction of the footsteps. Whoever or whatever it was kept walking slowly towards our camp. Then another loud snap happened in the direction them things were coming from. It was almost like whoever was out there was breaking limbs off of trees as they were walking towards us. Not big limbs, but big enough you could hear them pop. Keith reached into the tent and he grabbed his pistol. He said for some reason he just had a real bad feeling about this, and he just kind of held it real close to his side. It wasn't 10 seconds after he had got back at the tent holding his pistol, a pretty good sized limb ended up landing about 10 yards in front of us. We could see the outline of it, and when it hit the ground, we all jumped back towards the fire. Mark dove into the tent and he grabbed his pistol and he threw me my rifle. As the footsteps kept getting closer, we all were just standing there on edge, just wondering who in the hell is messing with us, or why are they throwing stuff at us, and what are they doing out here? Whoever this was started circling our campsite. The whole time we couldn't see them with our flashlights, and it felt like an eternity this person just kept walking around the camp. Periodically they'd break a limb off and throw it towards us, or just throw it in some random direction. The wind started to pick up just a hair that night, and it started blowing our face where whatever this was in front of us, the wind was blowing directly on us, and we all looked at each other because it was the worst smell that we've ever smelled. It was like BO mixed with a skunk. It was a very, very strong smell. The footsteps all of a sudden stopped, and we immediately began trying to shine our lights in the direction it was last stepping. We all stopped when one of us ended up stopping our lights on some eyes shining back at us. We could see something crouched on a hill, probably about 30 or 40 yards in front of us. Mark whispered, "Man, I think that's the biggest bear I've ever seen." I looked at the figure and immediately could tell it wasn't no bear. I said, "Man, there's no way that's a bear. That thing's crouched down like a person." We hadn't had our lights on it for more than 5 or 10 seconds when the thing stood up and walked just right beyond the range of our lights. Keith kind of stuttered a little bit and he said, "Man, that's not a bear, and that's not a damn person either." We all kept our lights fixed on where we had last saw it right as soon as it got out of range of our lights. And every single one of us was shaking. It was cold that night, and our nerves were on end. We were shaking like a little leaf. The footsteps started to fade as the thing walked further in the woods until we finally just couldn't hear it no more. It just faded out of view, or faded out of earshot. We put our chairs back to back near the fire, and we kept our ears fixed on any little noise coming out of the woods that night. We sat in silence for a while until Mark finally spoke up and said, "So, we all just saw Bigfoot, didn't we?" All of us just kind of started to break out laughing. I joked and said, "How much do you think it'd cost to get a full body mount of that thing?" And Keith said, "You think they're in season right now? And how much do you think it is to buy a tag for one?" We sat there just listening to the woods. We sat there and we were watching for probably around an hour when we could hear faint footsteps coming back towards us. Whatever it was stayed well beyond our lights this time and didn't circle us like it did before. We could hear it walking towards us and then walk away for a little bit, but it kept coming back. We began to hear what sounded like talking, but it wasn't any talking like I've ever heard or any of us have. And we've all seen the shows on Animal Planet like Finding Bigfoot and all them kind of ridiculous shows that have popped up over the years. And whatever this was, wasn't like how they do on some of them nut job shows. It wasn't no hooting and hollering and whoops and yells. It sounded like talking, but it just wasn't. Or at least there was no words that any of us could understand. I'm pretty sure all of us had itchy trigger fingers that night just because of nerves and because to us this was a monumental occasion that we're seeing something that in all honesty for North America is legendary. But whatever this creature was, it never got close enough to us again to ever let us see it. We would shine our lights all around the place looking for whereabouts we heard the footsteps last, and it never got close enough for us to get a light back on it. But for another good hour, we could hear what sounded like just little chatters or mumbles or little noises that whatever this thing was making. And some of the sounds would really make your skin crawl. Just because some of the sounds it made really did sound like talking, but there wasn't no pattern, there wasn't no cadence to it. And then it'd go on to make noises that sounded like something completely different. At one point, it ended up making a noise that sounded like a bird. And we all just sat there insanely confused because it sounded so close, but we knew it wasn't. And it just really, really set us off. Because we know that this is something big down in them woods. And it's doing some mimicry that's honestly impressive. Finally, later on into the night, I don't know how much time had passed, probably another 30 minutes since we'd just kind of sat there and was listening. But it finally stood up, turned around, and started walking back down the hill. And all of a sudden, after it took maybe 10 steps, we heard a loud crash like it knocked over a dead tree. And then it took off in a full sprint, crashing through laurel thickets and anything that was in its path. It ran till we couldn't hear it anymore, and for the final time that night, the woods went dead silent. We all sat there stunned by what we had seen and by what we had heard throughout the night. It wasn't long until the sun began to rise and we could finally start to see the sticks and branches that had been thrown at us during the night. After the sun was fully up, we all got up out of our chairs and started walking together around our campsite, just seeing if we could find any tracks or where this thing had been walking, or if we could find any proof of what we had seen this night. We wanted some kind of tangible evidence that this creature is real, whether it be Bigfoot or not. I started to walk in the direction that we heard it run off at the last time we heard it when it sprinted down the hill. And we were all right. The loud crash that we heard, it knocked over a tree. It was a small poplar tree, and it wasn't huge by any means, but it would have probably taken both me and Keith to knock it over, and that's us together doing everything we can. And the thing that really shocked us is that the tree wasn't just pushed over. The tree was still alive, and whatever knocked it over had pretty much pulled it up from the roots when it knocked it over. The amount of force that would take is something I can't even begin to fathom. After it was all said and done, we all spoke about, going out for our final day of hunting, and we knew we were going to have to pack up, but part of us didn't want to. We knew that whatever this thing was had a good chance of coming back either later in the day or even late into that night, and we wanted some sort of proof of it. But in the end, we had prior engagements and we had New Year's parties to be at, and we had promised our families we'd been back at a certain time the next day, so we knew we couldn't stay for another night, and it hurt us all to know that we couldn't stay for just one more night. So we all loaded back up, and during the morning we decided to put all our stuff into the truck and boat and just kind of get ready for our last day of hunting and to start the drive home that night. But after we loaded up everything into the truck and the boat, and got our campsite all packed away, we all agreed there's no way that we could go hunting this day because A, we are tired, and B, we're all still shaken and rattled after what we had seen and heard. We all were just completely, I'm not going to say terrified, but we weren't too thrilled with the thought of walking into the woods by ourselves and splitting up and going to different areas. On the drive home, we all kind of started to cool down a little bit and calm down after everything that was said and done. And we ended up starting to make little jokes about what we had seen, the legendary Bigfoot, the wild man of North Carolina, and how we're now gonna be the whack jobs saying that this beast, this creature is out in the woods, and to swear up and down that we've seen it. After we got back to where we lived, our homes and stuff, we didn't really want to talk about it to a ton of people. We spoke about it to some of our friends at parties and stuff, and even to our dads that had been in the woods a ton, and they had always joked and laughed about some of the, weird sounds that they had heard out in the woods, and we had mentioned kind of what we had heard and seen that night, but didn't go into huge details about it, just because, again, our whole lives we've seen the people that say Bigfoot or a creature like that exists, or, whack jobs. We'd spent so much time in the woods as kids growing up, and even into, early adulthood, that we all figured and kind of fully knew that something like that couldn't exist in, at the very least, in North Carolina. Just because, we didn't believe that the ecosystem could even sustain something that large, but we were kind of proven wrong, I guess you could say. About 2 months later, I was back up at home, and Keith was actually at home as well, and we met up and was talking, and he said, "Man, I gotta show you something." And I was like, "What is it, bud?" He said, "So, you still got that whole thing in Uwharrie fresh on your mind, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Remember the sounds that it made?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's still in my mind almost every day." He said, "I've got to show you something." And he pulled up a video that somebody had showed him, apparently a couple weeks ago. And it was apparently an audio recording that somebody out in, I believe, California had made. The man's name was Ron Moorhead. And the tapes are called the Sierra Camp tapes. And while it doesn't sound 100% alike, there's a few of them chatter and almost speech-like cadences that it really shook me and him to our core. Because the sounds were almost, I wouldn't say identical, but they were so similar that it really rattled both of us, and we both were like, this is exactly what we heard. Not to a T, but it's got to be the same species at the very least. All three of us still go hunting as much as we can. We still love to go out and run beagles for rabbit hunting, and still go out whitetail hunting with each other. We even went back to Uwharrie one time for archery season. Just we didn't stay the night that time because we couldn't. And every single one of us, all three of us, we still have never heard or seen anything like that again. And part of me is kind of glad, part of me is kind of sad about it too. Well, that's the end of the story. And I hope y'all enjoyed it, or at the very least found it entertaining. And again, thank you for listening.